everybody, and welcome back. Hi, Karen.
Hey, Christina, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. We are going to be having a thunderstorm soon, so let's try to get this episode going before I possibly lose my electricity.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, folks, we wanted to welcome you to a special episode of Simply Human. Since Karen and I started this channel and podcast, Karen and I have focused primarily on the shared day to day experiences that we face as individual human beings and have focused on the skills and strategies that can help you feel more confident and gain individual and interpersonal strengths and resilience. But at the time of this recording, which is in July 2024, there's so much going on in our country that is unprecedented and challenging us not just on an individual level, but all of us, our families, our friends, our community, our organizations. And we thought this was a time to maybe take a more big picture view and look at how we as a community can become a little bit more resilient and hopeful. So we wanted to take advantage of the fact that Karen and I have experience working in large systems. So I've worked as an organization development consultant in dealing with significant change. I was a change management consultant and worked on everything from new technology coming into an organization and changing all of the business processes and requiring training and maybe even different teams coming together. And then even the human side of a merger and an acquisition where we had two cultures coming together. And I've also worked at the community level. I was on the community emergency response team, and I provided training to our volunteers on disaster psychology. And Karen?
I actually have been working, graduating from graduate school. I've been working similar to Christina as an organizational development, working within organizations. I've also done business process reengineering, which include the holistic look of not just process and technology, but also the people side. So I've been working on the people side for a long time. So I've been doing that forever and helping with transitions from technology transitions all the way to organizational redesigns to dealing with people's transitions in an organization.
Yeah. Hopefully, by bringing together our joint experience and working in large groups and large systems, we can give you, if you're in an organization, if you are part of a community or volunteering in a community group, or maybe even this is just for your family, we're hoping to bring you some intentional and long term investment strategies to help the entire system become more resilient.
And this is all where I would ask you too is that this is a great way for you to comment below your experiences or your suggestions or anything you wanted to share. Because just like this one specifically is about us coming together as a community through these difficult times. Before we get going, we really want you to like and subscribe and really help us to get this in front of people because we know that this is a stressful time for everybody and we're all really all in it together in many ways. So,
Yeah.
you ready to go?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I mean, if we just take a look at the last couple of weeks, this is just the last couple of weeks. In July 2024, we had a presidential candidate who was a target of a failed assassination attempt, and one spectator died and two more were seriously injured. A Supreme Court justice was the target of a failed abduction attempt. There was just a global infrastructure shutdown because one company uploaded faulty software that disrupted subways, air traffic, businesses, hospitals,
Hospitals, yeah.
government, schools. It was nuts. A software upgrade. 67 counties in Texas have been declared a disaster emergency zone after Hurricane Beryl made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane. California, we got wildfires everywhere. There's like 26,000 Californians who had to be evacuated because of a wildfire that has now spread to over 38,000 acres. And over 245 million Americans have been contending with record breaking heat wave. Our nation, our states, our communities, and families are being tried and tested like they never have before, and we are collectively exhausted. So that's why we felt we needed to talk about how do you build resilience in groups and communities and organizations. And Karen, how's this been affecting you and the work you've been doing?
You have the stress that you have individuals that I work with in the companies that I work with. There's the stress within the organization of things happening, like the unexpected come up. So then you add on the stress of the organization itself because there's layoffs that occur, reorganization, a lot of vice presidents leaving, the hiring of vice presidents that take forever to happen, or, this whole thing of not knowing what's going to happen. There's so much uncertainty. And I think the thing too is, the return to work was the big issue, right? Whether it's hybrid, whether you're full time, so forth and so on. There's just a lot of stress because even people are moving jobs that didn't think about it. There's opening jobs where there's never enough people. That's always been a story, but it feels different this time. I think the thing is for me, as you were talking about it, it's not just in your little world now. Because it used to be just in my corporation. I could barely handle the stress within the organization, but I found a way to deal with the stress in the organization of my world. But now it's the bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that's why you wanted to do this, because it's something that we do have to come together on. And I think that's what's important now. So I go into this and I hear about this when you bring it all together. I don't know if you guys are noticing, but my shoulders are coming in. Okay. Before our conversation, and even when we were preparing, I think I was okay. But when you think it as a whole, I think it's what Christina are trying to say, just give you a moment to just take this in. Because if you totally ignore it, it's somehow in there, like caught up in this, ball somewhere. I've set it aside, but I really haven't set it aside because it still affects me. And so it's important just for us to just help you think through how there's some other things that you can do as a way to also make you feel more resilient, because you can do something about it instead of staying all in this bowl. Yeah. Is sharing you some ideas, and that will help you.
So let's sort of start. And Karen, I'm going to let you start with the first thing we want to focus on.
We've done a lot of episodes on this, building your own individual resilience. And we have to always remember that, because if we can't, as we do with the airline, I got to tell you, until I learned that, I got it. But it took me a long time to understand, why do they always talk about this airline oxygen mask? You put it on yourself first before you give it to anybody else. Well, now I get it. You got to put the mask on first that you can breathe, enough that you can actually help other people. Because if you don't put it on yourself first, how can you help others? And it's the same theory here. So we just want you to evaluate where you are. Okay. And so we want you to go back to looking at the resilience one we just did. There's some other ones in there. And we want you to notice 3 things. Are you noticing any feelings? Like, are you noticing that you're shocked all of a sudden by something that just happened, or depression or anxiety or grief or numbness? Because we ask you to feel it, not to get caught up in it, but to feel it, because it's important to acknowledge that the sadness, and even writing down or realizing what all you're sad about, because I think it's just the awareness, and then it gives that, like, you're giving yourself that freedom to acknowledge it. Are you also noticing any behavioral changes, Renee, where I'm like withdrawing, like going back to my room a lot, not wanting to even getting up anymore, just like a resolve where I just totally give up, blaming other people, like it's because of X, and putting, and that's what's happening a lot. You notice how much there's this blaming. We're doing a lot of blaming, and that's part of what we're trying to do. There's blaming. I don't even know, like there's a lot of misinformation. We're always talking about the past. Oh my gosh, the past, we had it better, da, da, da. And all of this is, and I forgot, increased substance abuse. There could be you drinking more. It's not to blame here. We're not trying to blame. We're trying you to be more aware of what's happening within your own world, but what are behaviors that you're doing, and to just acknowledge it and then make a conscious decision by just acknowledging it, taking a breath, and realizing what's going on. No judgment, but just what's going on.
Yeah, and there might be physical symptoms as well.
Yes. Yeah, like I have a lot of, I realize I'm having a lot of sleep disturbances, honestly. But I think those are the 3 things to look for. We want you to recognize it so you can take a pause to notice it, but not to get frozen in it, but to notice it, take a deep breath and realize, okay, so what do I want to do? So don't let your saber-toothed tiger, we've talked about the monkey brain, the saber-toothed tiger, that time of brain to take over. We want you to be able to go into your new brain and really think about what to do next. Christina, do you want to add anything else about that?
Just to encourage people to listen to the individual resilience episode, because you want to actually, as your first part of being a leader or being a resource in your family or in your community, is you have to get your own individual resilience plan back on track. If you are noticing any of those changes, reduce your own stress, and then start to move into proactively preparing for future stress, because we mentioned in the last episode that individual resilience is something you do across the lifespan. It's not a one and done. It's something that becomes a practice. The first thing for actually being a resource or a leader for groups is attend to your own resilience. The second thing is, did you have something, Karen?
Yeah, I was just going to say too, you don't have to be a formal leader when she means leader too, because there's influencing power where you could also be influencing other people, right? Because you could be like in your own group, you could be an informal leader or you're just a leader. So I just want to make sure we're clear about that as well.
Yeah, the reason we're giving you this information is whatever role that you're in, you may be the only person who has this information. You may be the only one who listens to this podcast. So don't worry about what your official title or role is. When I talk about leader, I mean with a small L, that any individual can take the lead. If you have the information, you understand it, and you're developing the skills, you can be that small L leader. Which that takes us to our next one, leaders. And now I'm talking about big L leaders. If you have a role in preparing your organization or your community, and the idea of building community resilience, that's something that you want to plan for. Just like individual resilience is over the lifespan, community and group and family resilience is something that needs to be attended to and nurtured continually. You're planning, implementing, maintaining. Plan, implement, maintain.
Mm-hmm.
So some aspects of that plan includes a stress management education. And by that, it could be within a, say, work environment, there has to be some boundaries. Like if you're in an organization and you aren't encouraging and teaching about the importance of figuring out what those boundaries are for work-life balance, you're not going to be managing your individual stress, but your entire team is also going to get burned out. As a volunteer in a first responder situation, there are very specific boundaries about how many hours you work at a time, and then you have to go home and rest. Planning in self-care boundaries, it kind of blends in with self-care, is really important. Making sure that that plan includes all the basics of sleep, making sure people are getting fed, making sure that your family is getting outdoors together, that the community has maybe mental health resources for self-care. If you're a leader in a community, you want to be thinking about what resources do we have that we can educate people on, that they can tap into for their own self-care. You need to create space and time for people to talk. And so that could be that you're having informal team gatherings, lunch and learns. If you're a community, it could be a town hall. Or maybe even if you're just a family, it's like you have your weekly family meetings to check in with people and create a space for them to talk about how they're feeling. Because what we're trying to prepare in your organization is getting into the habit of communicating and talking about what's going on instead of repressing it or pushing all down or feeling that I'm alone, I'm the only one feeling stressed out. There's a lot of power and resilience that comes when people feel connected. They can build resilience. And then finally, in stress management, you really have to, as a leader in a community or an organization or a family, really role model compassion and empathy. During these times, we all need to have compassion for each other. We have to understand we're all going under stress right now, and how can we be just kind and gentle?
I think what's interesting too is because I just came out of a 3-day workshop and they were talking a little bit about how one thing they wanted to institute is a managers just to get together and just to talk, like you just said. And I thought it was a great idea. And then trying to figure out a way the staff together can get together with or without managers, just have someone in staff bring people together and just to chat with what's going on. It's the most thing is to feel that you're not alone and that you can share. I think that was most important. And checking in on each other. That's part of the thing. And even if you aren't like a big owl, Christina was saying you could bring this up to your big owl that this is what's needed is just as important. There's the whole point about investment and the importance of we talk a lot about shared values and the ability to come together and have the shared point of values of community organization and the ability to really have dialogue on situations. We talk about dialogue in one of the previous episodes, the importance of being able to come together, just like we're saying earlier about coming together as a group just to share. It's almost like a group therapy, but I'm telling you right now, it's connecting that you also to the bigger purpose and that you're coming together to support each other. There is this love of each other to make it through. And I think we want to connect people to something bigger than themselves. I think it's the ability to just having those times when we just create that space. And it's interesting about shared values because I think in a time of crisis, it's great to have the values that you really care about even be more pronounced. And so one else thing that Christina was talking about to me about the importance of promoting flexibility, your hybrid, the flex time, so we're hoping that people are doing that, especially today's environment, but also the agility, right? Is there times when you guys can work and solve a problem more, even more so now than before as a Tiger team? Because I keep thinking also about that and power decision making is becoming more and more important. Sometimes when you get so stressed out, people want to control more. And the idea is not to control more, to actually empower more, right?
They want to
And
have
I
more
think
of a sense of control.
I also have a sense like leaders have to want a more sense of control, so they might more micromanage. That's what I was hearing about. Some, when you're stressed out, some people shadow side is micromanaging in an organization, and the idea is to recognize that that's not really the best approach.
Right.
Because that's like, am I doing something wrong that adds more to the whole environment of, oh my gosh, not another thing my boss is thinking that I can't do my job.
Yeah. And then I wanted to just go a little bit into if you're in a community where there is high risk for community crisis, like wildfire areas, like hurricane flooding areas, things to think about. Try to have a financial reserve because you never know when these crises happen. With community organizations and nonprofit, as a community, at least once a year, do a catastrophe scenario. Like we'll go down to the airport and like, what happens if there's a plane crash? Or we had it in town. What happens if there's a huge earthquake and part of the hospital collapses? So that everybody knows what their role is. Everybody knows everything down to how you use your radio. We would practice that. How would you do traffic control? So it's planning, setting up those resources in advance, because a lot of things people don't think about are their pets and their livestock. Even having a plan, like where am I going to take my pet? Because some shelters you can't have pets. If something happens, where can I go? Who's going to be my person I contact? And then if you're an organization, have a budget for outplacement services if you have big layoffs. I used to work in outplacement, and that is when there's a layoff, the companies provide career counseling like packages to help support the employees in their job search for where they're going next. And I thought it was wonderful. I was in the Silicon Valley. There's so many companies did invest and budget in having outplacement services and transitions, because again, that not only helps the people who have to leave, but it does help the people who stay, because there's a psychological phenomenon called the survivor syndrome, where people who didn't get laid off feel guilty. There was this one company that it really took care of its employees, even when they were laid off. When they came in like a bunch of golden retrievers. I tell you, they were just like, oh, where can we collaborate? Where's our collaborative space? Because created a culture that was so collaborative and so supported that even when these guys were laid off, they had so much resilience because it was all ahead of time. This is all something instilled way in advance. And so those employees, their bounce back rate was huge. It was really quite impressive. I worked with companies where the employees laid off were treated so badly. They were like sudden notice, immediately escorted by security. And they were just, there was shame. They were horrified. It created stress in the entire organization because it felt so secretive. Whereas this other company, it had created such a supportive, collaborative environment that even when the employees were laid off, their attitude was cheerful, and they kind of took over our whole center. They're like, hey, we're here. We like to collaborate. Do you have a big conference room for us? Because we want to collaborate together. And
that's cool. So they were helping each other out.
They were helping each other.
Oh,
and even the company, when they reorganized and were hiring some people back, they reached out, and then they had these career opportunities. And it was really, you can see the difference in how a company plans for these big, dramatic, stressful events.
Right.
But partly it's what do you invest in the culture to begin with? And then that investment in even employees that they were laying off, they invested in those employees, and it created an environment that was still really positive. These employees had nothing negative to say about the organization, the company that just laid them off. Whereas some of these other companies, there was so much shock. Some of them took weeks to take advantage of this outplacement because they were so traumatized by the way the layoff was handled. And really, I tell you, we could do a whole episode. I saw such variation in how this can be handled and the impact it has on the employees who are coming out. It's just such a range, and you see what's done well and what's not done well.
Yeah. And I almost feel like some organizations now, I don't know why, but it feels like they're trying to be more secretive of when they lay people off than they were before. I remember it just felt better. I mean, when you get laid off, everybody understood why and all this other stuff. And I feel like it's becoming more controlled. So I think it's very interesting about one of the things that we were talking about group support is really important about this information sharing. Is we were talking about earlier about stories and rumors that are created in a vacuum because you don't know what you don't know. And the longer you wait them, they fizzle and they become hardened in the person's mind. And before you know, everybody in the organization feels that way versus you just having a few people. By sharing that purpose, the goals related to the current situation, what's going on, and even saying that, I mean, you can't just say we don't know what, but we're working together now. We know it just hit. So we're just as shocked as you. But telling the truth, we're just as shocked as you. Or we heard this. I think it's that we talk about the transparency, about telling what you can truthfully. And I think that's what's important here, is not letting things fester because you're waiting for the perfect way. Some people say don't tell them till you know something. And for me, even the fact that they're thinking about it or they're shocked, you know, that it came around.
Or even if you say, I don't have any details, as soon as I get it, I'm going to be pulling us together to share, to create that understanding of transparency.
Yeah. And I think that's what's important. People thrive on more facts. And the more that you provide facts versus their assumptions, it really helps build the resilience.
Yeah. Facts are empowering. Rumors are destructive.
Yeah.
So provide, and then this is whether you're also applies to if you're in a town or a school or you belong to a volunteer community organization. And this information comes from best practices in dealing with disasters, is provide accurate feedback and dispel speculation, invite participation in the creative planning, how we're going to respond, invite people to be part of that planning, strengthen your practice of listening, cultivating compassion and non-judgment and empathy. Because during these types of time, everybody's like can be running around with their heads cut off. But if you stop and slow down and try to listen, that has such a powerful effect on the people around you. And then take some time to identify what talents and skills and resources exist in the community or organization for moving forward. And you keep your attention after the immediate crisis or the situation, having that vision. Like, this is a time that it is helpful in building resilience to keep in mind a vision of a positive future. Because like in the beginning, when I listed like just in 2 weeks, all the terrible things happening, like we can go down a rabbit hole and just get a bit of blinders on. Everything's bad, everything's bad, everything's bad.
Yeah, that there's
But
no hope, no hope, no hope,
there's
no
no
hope.
hope.
That's what I always
And
think.
this is,
I've been there.
there's a psychoanalyst, Viktor Frankl. Some of you may heard of his book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was an Austrian psychiatrist who ended up in Auschwitz. And he wrote a book about his experience. And one of the things when he talks about resilience, what was the difference between people who survived Auschwitz and those who didn't, was the power of a positive vision of the future, having
Okay.
something meaningful in the future. That is something in terms of this idea of providing support. Is if you are any kind of in a leader or you're the head of your family, it's really to keep that positive vision, that future. You have to keep that alive, because that is going to help with resilience.
One of the things I was also thinking about when you're talking about, that accurate facts and dispel speculation, we tend to, because of the lizard brain, right, go into this negative thinking or make assumptions. And it's really important that we slow that assumptions down because it's so quick. When we were doing this episode about that, is to be more curious, is what we were saying. Because as you hear, we're always talking about being more curious, because I think it's too easy to take the past. Oh, they're going to do the same thing they did last time. Or because of that fear comes in. And I think this is where it's important as a leader or even as a young person with your family, remind them of that. We don't know, is this fact or is it in a hypothesis, and hold it lightly. And so I think it's just really important to have that, because it is really differentiating between facts and a story that's going to increase that negativity.
Yeah, it's interesting, Karen, like, when I'm listening to all these different talking heads or whatnot, and I kind of follow people on YouTube from Gen Z, all the way to more like boomers. And I do find it, the older the people are, the more sort of just fixated they are. And then the younger, I hear a lot more like that space holding you're talking about, like, well, we don't know what's going to happen. I
Yeah,
just
I
know
noticed that in
this
my
is what I
daughter
can do.
versus my parents and myself.
Yeah.
Even I totally agree.
Yeah. That I see that young people just have more of that flexibility and agility and the ability to hold space for possibilities and not to hold tight to some assumption. More curiosity, more compassion, more empathy. I mean, I honestly, folks, if I notice that our demographics is an older demographic. So let me just put this out there. If you're wanting to build resilience for yourself, look to the younger generation, because they are an inspiration. Now, I want to just go over, because we're running on time, I'm just going to go over maybe the last three really quickly. Is that okay, Karen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So the last three are promote self and collective empowerment. And what we mean by empowerment is it's the power or capacity to produce a desired outcome, a belief that in yourself you have the capacity to produce a desired outcome.
Yep.
Part of that is joining others in tasks and projects that, again, is moving people forward. So having that positive vision and then engaging in activities. Link individuals and teams to the social, financial, and material resources they need to actually start getting some momentum going. And then encourage members to attend to making sure they're taking care of themselves. It's easy to get sort of going and rolling and then forgetting to, like, oh, did I eat? Did I sleep? So just look out for each other. So part of group and community resilience isn't just like looking out for ourselves, but we look out for each other. We should be checking in. Hey, How many days have you been working on this? Maybe it's, why don't you take a break? I'm going to take over now. So that attending to self-care isn't just a solo thing. We start thinking about it more as a collective. And then facilitate connectedness. So we've kind of touched on that, but we learned in the last episode about the research that has shown that when people are feeling connected to family, to faith community, even their pets, that will help build resilience. And so when we're talking about a community, find a community of other people who can get excited about whatever that positive vision or moving forward in, whether it's your community or your family. Get people to work together so they sort of address that feeling of being alone and I'm the only one. And finally, instilling hope and courage. Like when we talk about hope and courage, it really is something you have to have a practice in instilling. Some ways to do that is take a look at what strengths are available. What are the different strengths in the group? Because that can be like, oh, I didn't realize you could do that. And you can do XYZ and you have this resource. That starts to instill hope. It gets people out of feeling stuck. You can normalize the stress that people are feeling, but remind them it's temporary. So again, that will instill hope. I'm not here forever. Focus on what can be done, and maybe 80% of your attention is on what can be done, and only 20% of your attention is what's going on right now. And this comes from trauma research. So you acknowledge what's going on, but then you shift your attention to like 80% of what you can be doing and what's positive and what strengths that you have, and maybe only keep like 20% of your attention on the current stress. Because we don't want you to deny that it's there, but we don't want you to have 80% of your attention on the stress. We want you to have 80% on the strength. So 20, 80. And then finally, when there's successes, share, whether small or big, whatever successes you have, share in those successes with the people around you, with the team around you, with your fellow volunteers, whatever that is. Make sure that successes are being shared, because we all need a little bit of good news. So
I think the whole point too is with the small successes, it's like just taking a small action is enough for individual people. Just saying, wow, that's great that you did that small step, that you called somebody. I mean, that you started the process too. Sometimes our definitions of a small success may be different than what other people's definition of small successes. But again, it's to feel like hope in that person, just celebrate a win.
Did you have anything else under like hope
No,
and
I'm
courage?
just so glad that we're having this, because it goes back is that we cannot do this alone. We've never been meant to do this alone. We always hear the story about when things happen to fires, everybody comes together. And whether it's a corporation, we can come together as a group. It doesn't have to be all this outside. It could be even inside or in your family. It's just these things of instilling hope and courage. That's what it's about, because this world is tough. We never promised a happy, unbelievable life all the time, right? We just have to come together. And that's where, we've thought about, Christina, how you and I come together, and it helps us through to give us some hope and courage and stuff. And that's what I just want to remind us. Don't ever be alone. When you feel this, please reach out. And if you see something in something else, reach out too.
And then remember, so group and community resilience requires planning, and then care and feeding and sustaining. Be proactive and engage members of your community or your organization. Don't fall back into close your office door and, oh my God, you want to be proactive and reaching out.
Right.
Remember, put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you try to help others. Again, listen to that episode on resilience just for yourself, and make sure you are implementing your own individual resilience plan, because you're no good to anybody else if you're already burned out and overwhelmed by stress. We hope that this was helpful to get you started in planning for your organization or your community or even your family. And let us know if you have any questions in the comments, or you can email us at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com.
Yeah, I also want to say, your comments could be questions, or again, it's other ideas that you're using or other ideas you could, share with other people, because I think that's part of it. Because let's use this as a way to help each other as a community. Because that's what
Right.
Christina and I's intention is. Intention is to build this as a community that you can come to and share what you're facing.
All
Cool.
right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We hope this was helpful, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Until next time.
Until
Bye,
next
y'all.
time, see you later.